Beginning your life as a mom or a new parent is stressful enough as it is. And then many of us realize that the stress just starts to compound after this new baby has entered our life. Today, my guest, Krista, highlights that feeling of recognizing that, wow, in these months since I've had my baby, I've lost so much time to care for myself. I'm not going on those walks like I used to. I'm not making a healthy lunch. I'm just in survival mode. And you add on top of her situation a very stressful divorce. And you can see why you might look up after a couple of years and realize, wow, I need to find myself somewhere in the mix and get back to even just simple acts of self-care. I'm so delighted to bring this conversation to you with Krista Dykes of the Secret Mom Hacks podcast. Enjoy.
My name is Krista Dykes, and we are in the Middle Tennessee area. I am married. We have a little one. She is 5. She's my only one for now. I would be open to another one. We will see. Pregnancy, childbirth, all that jazz. This wild breastfeeding journey, it did not deter me from the idea of having another one.
Good.
Yes, being a mom has just been the most incredible experience, and I'm nearing 40, and they say there's never a perfect time to do any of this stuff, have a kid, buy a house, career change, any of that. But I will say there are some days I'm like, why didn't I do this like 10 years ago?
I know.
But it's wonderful. It's wonderful. And we're homeschooling. She started kindergarten this fall, and we're just plowing forward and trying to keep smiles on our faces and find all the joy in all the chaos.
Yeah, as they say, it's the longest, shortest time.
Yes.
Okay. You are also the host of a podcast called Secret Mom Hacks.
Yes.
Do you want to
I
tell us about
have.
that?
Sure. I started Secret Mom Hacks because babies don't come with instructions. That is my tagline. And pregnancy doesn't come with instructions. Right? Life does not come with instructions. When I was pregnant with my daughter, I will say I was terrified. And quite frankly, that's probably a huge part of the reason that I did just wait later, because I thought there was all these things I needed to know, or, oh, there's just not enough money in the bank, or whatever it is. There was always a reason now isn't the right time. And so anyway, when I finally did decide, okay, we just need to do this, and got pregnant, and which is funny, I won't go into my entire story. Everyone can go to secretmomhacks.com and listen to my birth stories there. But I didn't even know I was pregnant until I was about 20 weeks along, which is just wild and crazy, and ignorance is bliss. And anyway, once I knew I was pregnant, just these little hurdles that would crop up. And then when I actually had my daughter, I was planning for an unmedicated natural birth, and it ended up in an emergency C-section. And just getting off into the breastfeeding journey, which we're going to talk about a little more in depth today, I know, there were just all of these things that I thought I had absolutely no idea about XYZ. And if somebody could have maybe just told me it was okay, or hey, FYI, this could happen, and if it does, it's all going to be all right, just roll with it, or think this mantra or whatever. I just felt so in the dark, and I felt like I didn't have as many resources as I could have. I felt so stressed, truly. And anyway, my goal is, through my podcast, I just want moms and dads, whomever's listening, grandmas, to just know, hey, whatever journey you're on, you are not alone, and connect people with resources to just be the best parents we can be.
Great. Yeah. So I'm hearing a lot in your story already when it comes to the barriers that can make feeding our babies human milk so difficult. which I have started really switching from saying breastfeeding to human milk feeding, because this reminds people that we are humans and human babies are supposed to eat human milk. Yet so many of us struggle so much to feed human milk to human babies. Yet when we look at other mammals, this struggle does not exist. So why is it that so many of us struggle so much? And already in your story, I'm hearing some things that red flag as an IBCLC. I'm thinking, oh man, like I don't know your full story yet. I've just heard the snippets on your podcast and then also in the form that you completed for me. But I'm hearing, oh yeah, I can see why you might have had a rough start given the barriers that you were already facing in pregnancy. And this is not unusual, right? So many of us face this. And that's why you have your podcast to help people not feel alone. And it's why I have my podcast to uncover these barriers for people. But I want to take you even further back, way back into your childhood. And I want you to think about what your exposure to baby feeding was as a young girl. Did you see anybody breastfeeding? Did you play with baby dolls? And if you did, how did you feed those dolls? Because this is, I think, the earliest barrier to baby feeding. So tell me about it.
Absolutely. I was never around babies very often as a kid, and I was scared to hold them because I thought, this is a baby, it's gonna break. And my husband's so funny now because he's a nurse and he's, honey, babies bounce. They're not gonna break. And I'm like, we shouldn't say they bounce. And now, no, being a mom, I have figured that part out. But as a little kid, I'm just thinking this little human body is so fragile and growing and new, and I don't want to mess it up. So as a little kid, I was just scared to hold babies. Now, I did have baby dolls, and when I would feed the baby dolls, I had a bottle. I never pretended I was nursing the baby. I'm trying to think, like my parents' friends who'd had babies, it was when they were nursing them, they would go inside and they would just step away for a minute from everybody and they would breastfeed their baby, or they would have a bottle. Like I saw lots of bottles, but I never saw, and even as a teenager, I never saw breastfeeding. Like now, I do feel like it is more common now when I'm out and about. I see moms with the wraps or like the covers around them. And even some of my clothes, I had nursing tops, but it was something, just back to your question, as a little kid, I didn't really see that very much. And I'm from a really small town, and I think that it may have just been considered taboo then, or perhaps women just weren't comfortable doing that. And I feel like the world we live in now is more accommodating to that.
Yeah. And then along those lines, what I notice as a professional in this space when I'm doing a consultation, I have noticed for a long time an uncomfortability with my clients touching their own breasts. I would love to know, as you were growing up and getting into your teen years, what were the conversations like with either your parents or your teachers or other people in your life about your changing body and about the purpose of your breasts and why they were growing? Did you have any conversations like that?
Oh, yeah. Yes and no. I feel that they were cycle, and which was very young, by the way. I can't remember my exact age, but it was like fourth grade. It was either fourth or fifth grade. And yes, that's when I was starting to develop my breasts. And I remember as a little kid going into my parents' bathroom and finding my mom's lady items, her tampons, her pads, and just being so curious about what these things are and why does she have them. And yeah, honey, your body's changing and you'll be getting hair in places down in your private area and under your arms. And we can talk about shaving your legs at some point if that's something you want to do, all of that. But I remember them being very short, specific conversations, and not necessarily, I don't remember there being like, so what questions do you have? Or do you need to talk further about this? It was just more like to the point, and this is what it is. And I realize now as an adult and having my own daughter, and we're not having those conversations quite yet because she's only 5, but I realize to just the time that she grew up in, she was doing the best she
Yeah.
could with the information she had, and two, was likely modeling it from what was modeled to her
Or
with
was doing an
my
even
grandmother.
better job than what was modeled to her,
Exactly.
at least
Exactly.
approaching the conversation.
Yes, yes. The conversations with my dad were, again, they were there, but almost just more out of fear from him, more of boys are gonna want to touch your boobs. I mean, that was pretty much it. And like, Krista, we would go out to the movies on a Friday night. They would drop me off with friends or whatever. I would meet friends at the movie theater, or we would go have pizza. And Krista, I've always been a very modest person, truly, like in terms of my attire, truly like a June Cleaver. I've never been somebody who just, how skinny can my straps be or whatever. I've always liked to stay covered up. But as a kid, as a junior high, being in high school, I would wear a little V-neck, something still to me, something that I thought this is okay, because I didn't want to be embarrassed or whatever. But my dad would still, Krista, that V-neck's too low. You need to rethink your outfit. you know, boys are going to want to touch your boobs. We don't want to entice anyone. So
Yeah, that's
that
so
was,
interesting. I think this is really common, and, what I'm hearing is just the absence of, and this is not just in your family, but this is a cultural barrier, the absence of the discussion of the purpose of the mammary glands. You're developing these mammary glands because you're a mammal and mammals feed their babies with their own milk. Isn't that so cool? So that's why they're growing right now, so that at the time, if you ever do want to feed a baby, you'll be able to. Like, do you have any questions about that? And so instead of focusing on the breast, that part of your body, as like this really cool thing that will allow you to nurture your babies, it becomes this shameful part that you must cover up and become sexualized, and you have no control over how big they are, or like a lot of people have trouble covering up their breasts because of their size, or because they have a hard time fitting into bras, or bras are expensive. And the fact that is what gets focused on instead of what their biological function is, I find so fascinating as a function of our society. And in other places, it is not always the case.
yes. Yes, I agree. And that's even something I remember. There was always this little uh, voice in my head, I guess you would say, when I was nursing my daughter. Of my initial thought was, oh, she's hungry. Where is a nursing room? Where can I take her to step away? That's always my initial thought. If
Mhm.
there isn't, if that's not an option, okay, glad I brought my cover up or whatever that I can just put over the top and my nursing bra, and we'll just do that here. But that wasn't my first thought. It was
Right.
more, how can I not pop this out in public?
Yeah, so it's interesting that that voice from your dad of, "Oh, you need to rethink that outfit," is still coming out as you're using the breast for their biological function to say, "Oh, I need to cover these up," even though you're using them to feed a baby. That through line sticks with us. And it's, you can't just take that away when that's the culture we've been brought up in. And I noticed this with so many clients that now we're supposed to be comfortable with touching our breasts, with using them to feed our baby, with adjusting our baby on our breasts. And You can't just flip a switch and all of a sudden be comfortable. And it is one of the barriers that makes feeding our baby so difficult. Is it does take a familiarity with your body to be able to feed, and if you haven't become familiar, then you're doing a lot of catching up in a very short amount of time if you want to get enough milk into that baby right away.
Yes. Which likely leads into just those obstacles that we encountered right after I had her.
We'll get back to hearing some of the obstacles that Krista faced in about 90 seconds. But take a minute, listen to this ad from my sponsor, and if it's something that you are interested in, at least check it out. That's how you support the show. You've heard me now for a few months talking about how much I've enjoyed getting home cooked meals delivered right to my front door from feastandfettle.com. And I'm here today to tell you that if you know somebody who is in the postpartum period, who you would like to provide true support to, that you should go to feastandfettle.com and order home cooked meals to be delivered right to their front door. One of the biggest barriers to breastfeeding success is a lack of support. A new parent is feeding a baby up to 15 times a day. How on earth do we expect that person to feed that baby that many times, also feed themselves, and provide meals to other members of their family? There's not enough time. You know how hard it is as a busy parent yourself to try to put meals on the table. Go to feastandfettle.com, use my code MILK, MILK, coordinate which meals they would like to have delivered, and send them a week's worth of delicious meals. And be the person who eases the burden for them. What a gift. I can't think of a better way to support somebody in the postpartum period. Yeah, so what were some of those obstacles?
Yes. So as I mentioned, we ended up in the emergency C-section, and which at the end of the day, I'm just happy that we're here and I have a happy, healthy baby. And they come in and they're like, "It's time to feed her. What is your feeding plan?" And I said that I planned to breastfeed her. They said, "Okay, we'll bring her in and we'll just get started." And I just remember like, they bring her in, and of course, it seemed like there were 18 people in the room, first of all. And I know there weren't. There were probably maybe 3 or 4 people in the room at the time, but still, that was already made me nervous because I'm like, I'm about to take my top off or let the girls out in front of all of these people when really only one person in here has seen them before. And that's not even what matters. Who cares about that? It's about feeding the baby. But I already have that playing through my head as these strangers are about to see my boobs.
Exactly.
And
And who were in the room? I'm sorry to interrupt. Who were the people in the room?
yeah, so it was my daughter's father, and then
Mm.
there was I am divorced now, so little cat divorced but remarried
Uh-huh.
to someone else. But so my husband at the time, and then it was probably 2 or 3 nurses that were in there.
Okay.
And that was it. I didn't even know that your profession existed at that time. I didn't know a lactation consultant was even a thing. And if I had, I certainly would have hired someone from months ahead of time to just help walk me through this
Right.
situation. But it was nurses. And so they bring her to me, and I had my hospital gown on and take that top off, and they put her up to me, and I'm just like, I don't even know what I'm doing. Okay, just try to pop her on. So she's on there. So I think don't even know what a proper latch is at that point. I don't know what any of this means, but her mouth is on my breast, and we're trying to get her going. And it's like nothing is really happening. It's like she's on there. Maybe I could feel her tongue. Like it seemed like she was trying to latch and start nursing, but it just really wasn't happening. I'm holding her up to me, and they're like, let's try a different position. And so we adjusted her a little. That didn't do much. And it was like we tried a couple of different things, and it just really wasn't working.
So what about it wasn't working? How did you know it wasn't working?
Milk was not coming out. There was no milk coming out. There was
How did
no
how did you know milk was not coming out?
they like I'm wanting to say they were like, "Hold on just a minute. Let's pull her back. Let's see if anything's coming out of your breast." And nothing was coming out of my breast at that point. Or
Mhm.
it was just a little drop, like
Mhm.
a little droplet. And they were like, "Yeah, this is not going to work in this moment. Like we need to get something in the baby." So they were like, "Why don't we bring a pump and we'll show you how to use the pump and you can pump and then you can feed her with a dropper." And so like I said, we tried that. And it's not like they just said, stop trying to breastfeed her. But they were like, in that moment for her, she'd never eaten outside in the world before. So they were like, let's bring this pump. Let's do that. And once I got attached to the pump, that's when I was like, oh, this is what it feels like. I didn't know what letdown was. I just didn't know what any of the mechanics of how breastfeeding worked. The feeling like I don't know any other way to describe this other than a sharp, like little sharp, prickly. It not that sounds painful, and I'm not meaning for it to sound painful, but it's almost like sharp, tingly feeling of the letdown. I was not experiencing that sensation as I was nursing with my daughter or trying to nurse, but that pump that got everything flowing. And I managed to pump enough to start feeding her with a little dropper. And then once she got fed, then they were like, a couple of hours later, when it was time for her feeding again, okay, let's try this again. We're going to bring her to you. So we tried that in the hospital several times. That was always the first try, was trying to get her to latch versus just straight going to the pump. And I was in the hospital after I'd had her for, I don't know, 2 or 3 days, I guess it was, because it was a C-section. But yeah, their initial thing was always, let's just try to get her to latch and let's try that. And ultimately we just need to feed her. So we may just have to have you pump if she's not latching. And so then they were thinking, oh, maybe she has a tongue tie. Like they were trying to troubleshoot, like, why isn't this working? And so then it got to the point of, we have a list of lactation consultants that if this is the route you are still wanting to pursue, we encourage you to reach out to some of these lactation consultants and they can likely help you. Before I even left the hospital, I had called a couple of them and ended up getting connected with one locally who she came over, and of course she had looked at my daughter, looking inside my daughter's mouth. And again, I didn't realize all of the variables that could come into play, and between tongue ties and lip ties and all of this stuff, and just their little tongues not quite having enough muscle yet to do all of the things that you know about. But so she had looked at inside my daughter's mouth, and she was like, it looks like there could potentially be a tongue tie here, and there are specialists who can help to address that if that is the case. If after going through what I'm going to walk you through, if that doesn't get you there, you may need to look further at some specialists who address lip ties and tongue ties and so on. So then it was like, okay, Krista, take your top off. And I was like, yes, whatever you need, let's do this. And again, she starts talking about the different positions and just putting my daughter, she was like, it really should be at this angle, ideally, to get you started. And then as she was watching her trying to nurse and everything, again, I think she really was boiling it down to the strength of her tongue at that point, just still being so new and
Mhm.
not mastering that skill yet. And so ultimately, what really helped me, in addition to several texts and phone calls afterwards, but really was a nipple shield. I didn't even know a nipple shield existed, had no idea what this device was, but she pulled out that nipple shield and she was like, let's try this. And I think we can be off to the races. And so we started using that nipple shield. And by the time she left, my daughter was nursing, and I felt that sensation that I was feeling with the pumps in the hospital. And truly, it was, that's exactly what I needed. I just needed a specialist like you, somebody's advice to just get in there with me and figure out, okay, what do I need to modify on my side with my daughter? What can we do to just help her meet in the middle here with both of us and get this figured out? So
Mhm.
I used that nipple shield for probably about a month and then didn't really need it. By that time, I think my daughter had strengthened those muscles in her tongue, and I never had to see a specialist for a tongue tie or anything like that. And we managed to nurse for, it was about, and I ended up nursing and pumping, by the way, because at that point I was going into, this was pre-pandemic, so I was going into a full-time job, 40 hours a week, 5 days a week, dealing with an hour-long commute and, all that jazz.
Mhm.
And so I would pack my pump with me every day and I would pump and, send those bottles to her daycare. And something, I'm sure you're familiar with this likely, but I did not know about this until I was just Googling at that time and stumbling upon it. The wireless breast pumps. I didn't know about them either as I was pregnant, or I would have put this on a baby shower list. But having those wireless breast pumps, I had the Willow breast pumps. And so for me to be in a meeting or just walk around and not be stuck in a room, it was the most freeing thing to
Did
be
you
able
work
to
in
just,
an office setting?
I did.
Okay.
Yes. I
Mhm.
worked in an office setting. And so again, my preference was always to go to the room because I had a Spectra pump, which I
Mhm.
loved. It was really good. And that was the most efficient and powerful for sure. Got the
Right.
best results from it. But in a pinch, if it was just a really busy day where I had to do a walkthrough somewhere or something like that, or being in the car, those wireless breast pumps were amazing. But anyway, I would pump and send the milk to daycare for my daughter. And then at night, I was still nursing. And at 6 months, I realized that my marriage at that point was not working out.
Mhm.
And shortly after that, a couple of months later, is when I had actually filed for divorce for my now ex-husband. And it's interesting how that timeline also correlates with the breastfeeding. So when everything had happened with my former spouse, I was in a situation where my daughter and I moved in with my parents, and in terms of custody and everything, he did have rights, but in a sense he didn't. Again, I don't want to deep dive too far here, but all I will say is then and now there are no overnight visits with him. So that was not something that I had to encounter.
Oh.
What I did have to troubleshoot was the stress of it and just dealing with the stress of this other person and the choices they made. I was dealing with multiple attorneys. My ex-husband is a felon, so again, I will just leave it at
Mhm.
that, dealing with some criminal issues and then also just dealing with the divorce side of it.
Mm.
So it was like my world had just felt like it exploded and shattered into pieces. So not only was I trying to figure out this whole breastfeeding thing and just keeping this human alive now,
Mhm.
essentially on my own. We were really fortunate that my parents are in this area. So we were able to move in with my parents, and they truly became my rock.
Mhm.
And again, it was really helpful to have my parents close by because they could feed into, oh, well, when we were raising you or when we were trying to figure that out with you, here's what happened. So again, pros and cons with that for sure.
Yes. Uh-huh.
But it really was just, not only was I trying to figure that out, keeping the human alive, but I was also trying to figure out, who am I? What has happened? What have I just been through? I was married for 9 years when that had
Wow.
happened. So it's not like this was just
Mhm.
somebody that I've been around for a year or two and we've started a family. No, this is someone that I was with for nearly a decade and had a baby. And then all of this happened. So I was just really taking a step back and trying to figure out, who am I as a mom, as an ex-wife, as a woman, just trying to figure out,
Right.
to red flags and like, how did I not see this coming? And just all of the stress that is included with all of that, I know now impacted my breastfeeding.
I was just about
There's
to ask if that had an impact on your milk supply, that you can now look
it
back and see where there was an impact even if you didn't know it was happening at the time.
once I got into that flow and routine of, okay, this is what we do, this is all working out, when I was very naive and not knowing what was happening in my marriage and that relationship, things were good. And I felt, oh, my supply was great. And I was drinking lots of water and I was eating healthy and I was staying active and all the things they say to do. And I had a great oversupply in the freezer, which was awesome. And was even looking at potentially, hey, maybe I could connect with a local milk bank. I might need to, because I don't know that my daughter will use all of this. And if there's another mom I can help, great. Then I actually ended up never calling the milk bank. And I guess again, everything just works in mysterious ways, right? Of course, I ended up blowing through that, because about the time I found out everything that I found out, then that's where you see that correlation of, okay, now I'm more stressed. Now I'm not drinking as much water. Now, times when I would maybe be stepping out to take a 15 or 20-minute walk on my lunch break, I'm using my lunch break to talk with my attorney, or I'm
Mhm,
using my lunch break to talk with a detective, or
mhm.
whatever the case may be. My self-care time greatly dwindled, and it really, I don't want to call it panic time, but it was really just me trying to figure out what in the world was happening and talking with, I'd gotten into therapy then at that point, and just doing everything I could to just try to figure out the best path forward and protecting my daughter. And so you can certainly see a correlation in that. That's when I started buying lactation supplements and getting the lactation tea and just doing lactation cookies, which I guess everybody has an opinion on that. I felt like they helped me. I don't remember what special ingredient was in them, but they were chocolate chip cookies that were really good. And I felt like my milk supply went up when I did eat those. And it was nice that it was a little treat.
Probably your milk supply went up when you ate them because you were treating yourself and you had some feel-good hormones coursing through your
Yes.
body, and it allowed your body to release some milk that it was holding in, because you can't release milk when you have so many stress
Yes.
hormones coursing through your body.
Yes. And so all of that time was very stressful. And I remember I had gone back and forth of thinking, like, because my goal was, I just want to breastfeed her for a year. Like, if I can get to a year, then I'll feel like, okay, after that, then I feel good about, we are done breastfeeding and that's fine. And that's what my mom did for me. My mom breastfed me for a year, and I felt like my immunity has always been good. And that's just what I wanted for my daughter. And so around that, like 6, 8, 9 month mark is really when I felt like my supply started dwindling. That's when I was trying to use those other supplements. And I remember it going through my mind. And I remember, for whatever reason, and again, I know everybody has an opinion on this, and there's all these different thoughts and philosophies. But I remember thinking, you're gonna have to start using formula. And I remember in that moment feeling like I'd failed.
Oh.
And once again, though, I had to like take a step back for a minute and just talk with myself and just, but Krista, you have not failed. You are dealing with
Mhm,
extenuating circumstances out of your control. Your daughter is not hungry.
mhm,
Leaving her hungry would be failing her. So the failure is if you don't do something. You've got to figure this out. You're already stressing yourself out, being so hard on yourself, trying
mhm,
to get the supply up, do what you can. And you know what? If she's still hungry after she's nursed and you are just, and she's not getting any more out of you, then it's okay to make a bottle of formula. That's
mhm.
perfectly fine.
Right.
But I just remember having that conversation with myself of, I didn't want to do that. But it's fine. It's totally fine. And I did. I can't remember what form. I had ended up getting several formula samples just from different things that I had signed up for right before I had our daughter. And so it was like, I have these here. So that's why they're there, is to feed her. So just use them and it's fine. But I still held out low, and I was like, I'm going to keep on feeding, and I'm not going to feel bad about the formula. It's fine. But I did keep nursing her all the way until she turned 1. Then I was like, okay, now we are just the girls are going back to their own. I may have worn nursing bras for an extra year after that just because they were so comfortable. but yeah, then I just went strictly to formula feeding, and then trying, at that point she's moving towards like pouches and trying some not solids, just that next step in
Mhm.
feeding.
Yeah. Okay. Okay. Yeah. And so it can be really hard when you have made it so far to that 6 month, 9 month, 10-month mark with exclusive breast milk, and you're realizing, wait a minute, something's happening here. The amount that she is needing is not matching up with the amount that I am producing, but I've made it so far. I thought I did it. And then to realize, okay, I do have to supplement. It's a different kind of readjustment because you did make it so far. And so sometimes it can be really hard for a person to say, oh man, I made it this many months and now I need to add in the formula. So tell me about that moment, that first bottle that you created for your daughter, and what that was like to say, you know what, I'm just going to do it. And how did you feel that very first time, and how did you process those feelings? And then moving forward, did it get easier?
Absolutely. How I felt that first time, I remember just thinking, I've nursed and she's still hungry, and I'm not mad at anybody. This little baby, she's just hungry. She just wants to eat. And there was a little bit of disappointment in myself but I am not creating enough that is satisfying her. But once again, I just had to step back and listen to the little voice in my head that said, but this isn't about you. It is about her. She is still hungry. You have those you have that formula in the kitchen. Just go do it. You want a satisfied baby. And again, this isn't you saying, Krista, you're stopping. When she's hungry again later, you're going to go for it again. You likely will have replaced everything she just took out of you. That's going to come back. So the only way to quit is to just say, I quit and I'm not giving up on this. Just give her that formula and be okay with it. But with her, you just want her to feel good and full and satisfied and happy. And so I made that bottle, and I remember just being hopeful, thinking, oh my gosh, I hope she will take this. Cause I remember being a little nervous,
Mm.
thinking, we've never tried formula. What's this experience going to be like? And I tried to make it, I didn't want it to be too cold for her, and I didn't want it to be too hot. Finding that right temperature of, what is that lukewarm temperature of breast milk? Trying to find just that right temp, because it's like, I'm not trying to fool her here, but this is clearly going to be different. But my hope is that she's going to accept it and just be happy and feel satiated. And I filled that bottle and shook it and took it to her and popped it in her mouth, just, oh gosh, please take this. But she sucked that bottle down so fast
Mm.
and was happy and took a nap. And a little bit later, when it was time to do it all again, we just repeated that process. And each time it did get easier.
Mhm.
And again, happy baby, happy mama. So
Right.
if
Yeah.
she's happy, as long as she's not fussing and she's just happy, then that was helping me to be
Mhm.
calm and feel like I had done the right thing for her.
Mhm. Yeah, and her life probably changed very little in that moment. It feels like a big
Exactly.
moment for you, and I always like to remind people that it is the job of people like me and of public health experts to figure out how we get more people exclusively breastfeeding for longer periods of time. It is not the individual person who needs to feed their baby in the moment. It is not their job to figure that out right then. Your job is to feed your baby in whatever way you need to. It is our job to figure out how to make that easier for you by removing barriers. And little by little, we hope that we do that for more and more families. But if in this moment, what your baby needs is formula, then great, you do that for your baby.
Yes. And I'm really happy that I just removed myself from the equation
Right.
and just thought, what does she need? What can I do to help satisfy her? Again, I'm going to be over here. I'm still going to be taking my supplements. I'm going to do what I can to just still make it to this 12-month mark with nursing, but I'm not going to feel bad about feeding my baby in whatever I need to do to make that happen in this
Mhm.
moment.
So, as we wrap up, are there any other, as you think about your story, are there any other barriers that made it difficult for you to feed that you want to mention?
I wish that I would have known that a lactation consultant is a profession, that there are many reputable lactation consultants out there, that if breastfeeding is a priority for you, which it was for me, that around month 6 or 7 of the pregnancy, I wish I would have called again, know that it existed and gone through a list of who is going to be the right lactation consultant for me and for our family, because then I feel like all of the hurdles that I encountered, I would have at least had somebody to handhold me in the I'm sure she would have come to the hospital to help versus me just relying on these 3 strangers standing around me
Mhm.
looking at me topless,
Mhm.
because that's not the focus of their job, and for someone like you, that is your specialty. But I would just say do everything you can to focus on self-care. I'm not saying that all day every day needs to be about you and self-care. That relationship is way gone and all of that is handled and just in a very different chapter of life. And even in those stressful moments, understanding the importance of drinking plenty of water and eating healthy meals. Things that I'm doing now that I wish I could have told brand new mom Krista about. I'm parenting this 5-year-old now. What I wish I would have just realized when my daughter was 6 months old is it's really difficult to take care of her if you're not taking care of yourself. And yes, things are crazy. You're talking with attorneys, you're talking with therapists, you're dealing with lots of work obligations, and you have deadlines, and you've got to remain very professional while also pumping and just all these dizzying things. And my healthy meals, my self care rituals, which at the time was primarily walking and just trying to hit like a certain step count. I wasn't doing any crazy athletic classes or anything like that at that point. But these days, I do specifically, I have become a little more disciplined. And you're not going to be your best self if you don't get out and get some fresh air and just walk for a little bit, be in nature, listen to an audiobook for 10 or 15 minutes or whatever, because it's in those moments that you can come back. And once you've taken care of yourself, you can come back and truly be the best parent you can be and be more engaged.
You did the best you could in the moment with the resources you
Yes.
had, as all of us do. And I think that's also what your podcast is about, Secret Mom Hacks, is just helping people to feel really good about the decisions they're making. Sometimes it's just you, and sometimes it's other people talking about various aspects of being a mom and how they have come to terms with feeling really good about various aspects of motherhood. And so I really encourage people to go and check it out. And you can find Secret Mom Hacks anywhere you listen to podcasts. Is that right?
Yes, that
No.
is correct. I'm
Okay.
on all platforms.
Okay. Awesome. Yeah, and that's really good advice. All we can do is try to do our best and know that each new day is a new day and each new moment is a new moment.
Exactly. It's so easy for us to feel guilty about XYZ, whatever you want to insert there. And that's something I just try to tell myself every day. If I feel bad about something that happened the day before or an hour before, it's never too late to just make the day better and make that week better.
Exactly. Awesome. Thank you so much for coming on and sharing your breastfeeding stories and particularly shining a light on the things that may have made your journey more difficult, because that's how others can walk away and say, you know what, I'm seeing this too, or I'm going to try to do things a little differently based on what I've heard. And that's how we remove those barriers. So I thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Lo. Have a great day.
It is never too late to have a better day, a better week, a better month. And one of the ways we do that is by reaching out for support when we need it. So whether that means phoning a friend, taking a risk and going to that in-person new parent support group, or hiring a lactation consultant if a lot of your stress revolves around baby feeding. I would love to be the person that takes you from feeling stressed and anxious and unsure about your milk supply, about bottle refusal, about weaning even, to feeling confident that you are making the decisions that are right for your family, guided by expert lactation care. I can't wait to talk to you. You can find me by going to www.quavinbirthservices.com. And finally, one other way to just take a load off is by going to feastandfettle.com and using my code MILK, MILK, to get $30 off your first week's delivery. This is for anyone who lives in Rhode Island, Massachusetts, Connecticut, New Hampshire, and now Maine. Talk to you soon. Bye.